algorithm for feed forward, which will just take the input and we will compute and we'll get the final output. Then I will go over the quantum algorithm for back propagation, which will compute the using the loss, which will update the kernel and the weight. And then finally, I'll show the numerical simulation.
Ismail,
So
can you please briefly tell what actually feed forward and back propagation mean? I mean, I'm not familiar with these things.
yes, feed forward is actually taking this input and passing it through this architecture where we have defined convolution product and non-linearity and pooling. So these are three tasks which encapsulate the convolution layer, and then there are fully connected layers. So once we pass it through this, we will get like for our input, we'll get some labels, right? So for example, if I want to classify if this is a car or a truck or a van, I'll get that with, so I'll get this as the final output. With 0.9 will be at the car, and everywhere else it will be like, so for some other cell will be 0.1, and everywhere else it will be 0. So this shows that our algorithm thinks it is a car with 90% probability, and it is a truck with 10% probability, and it says that everything else is not possible, right? So this is the feed forward. Now to do good feed forward, I mean to be able to classify, we have to train our architecture, like the weights that I was multiplying it with, the kernel, so they are trainable actually. So I can modify my weights in this kernel so that I get a representation that I want. So uh, yeah, I know it will, I mean, it will be a little tough to understand if you're not familiar, but what we're trying to do is we are just going to pass through some weights. You can think like we are going to pass through some weights, and then we are going to see if we are arriving at a correct output or not. And then if we are not arriving, then we'll go and update the weight and then come back again. And this will go on forever. So this is just the classical neural network that uh, neural network training procedure that we do. Okay, so I'll first start with quantum algorithm for feed forward. I'll talk about the high level algorithm. So what we'll do is we want to do perform the convolution product in superposition. For so I showed the like, yeah. So we'll do convolution product in superposition. We will then encode the resulting values in registers. We will normalize and apply nonlinearity. We'll put back the results in amplitude, and then we'll sample only the highest element. So I'll go over all of these. This is just yeah. So the first thing is to do the convolution product estimation. Now we have seen that XL convolution product with KL can be interpreted as a matrix multiplication AL into FL, and which is what we want, YL plus 1, right? So we use quantum states proportional to the rows of AL and denoted by, which is denoted by AP, and the columns of FL, which is denoted by FQ. So these are normalized states which represent the rows and the columns of uh, uh, AL and FL respectively. What we want then is YL plus 1, which is given by the norms multiplied by the inner product of this state AP and FQ. We have to multiply the norms because this is a normalized vector state, right? So this will be our goal. We want to achieve this. So we'll use the quantum inner product estimation, which was given in this paper, the Q means paper by Kerenidis, Landman, Duonjo, and Prakash in 2018. So before that, I'll first introduce a quantum preliminary that we are going to use, which is the QRAM. So this is the quantum random access memory that Kerenidis and Prakash like defined in their 2017 paper, Quantum Recommendation System. I'll just go over the brief properties that we need. I'll not show any proof. So for example, for taking n cross d,
Ismail,
yeah, yes,
yeah, so the vectors that you can you go to previous slide?
yes,
This AP and FQ. So are they
yeah.
from the same Hilbert space?
Uh,
The dimension of rows and column can be different, right?
yes, they will, but they will be from the same Hilbert space. Yeah, we can take a, I think, a bigger Hilbert space and then,
Oh, okay.
okay. Yeah, so take this QRAM has this property that given a matrix of n cross d, we the time to insert, update, or delete any single entry is log square n, O of log square n, and a quantum algorithm with access to the data structure can perform these two following unitaries in again times log square n. The first unitary is giving the index I in the first register and 0 like empty second register, I mean 0 in the second register, we can get a quantum state Vi in the second register. Or like this is a row of a matrix, right? And the second unitary is given 0 in a quantum register, we can get a superposition with amplitudes being the norms of the rows. So using this, we have
Sorry, Vi
some
is the vector, Vi is the ith row, I should think of.
ith row, yes. And
see.
this is the norm of
Okay.
yes. Okay. So we have a quantum linear algebra procedures using quantum random access memory. So there are a procedure for matrix vector multiplication, matrix multiplication. So I'll just be assuming those. So we have a way to load AP and FQ using the unitary I showed in the previous slide. Given P and 0 in two registers, we can get P and AP, and Q and 0, we can get Q and FQ. So assuming this is possible, we now do the quantum convolutional product estimation.
So we are storing. So we are storing our input in QRAM, right?
Yes, we have it stored in the QRAM.
They give construction of QRAM, or they assume that if QRAM kind of a thing exists, then we can do all these things first.
Yes, sir. It is actually assumed that this kind of a thing will exist in the future.
I see.
Actually, now they are working on different ways. They are not working on QRAM because they think that it won't be possible in the near term. So they have, like in the recent papers, they have shifted to different architectures, different data loading techniques. But at the time of this paper, they were working with QRAM.
I see.
So yes, we start with this state where we have the P and Q, the indices in the first two registers. We have an equal superposition of 0 and 1 in the third. And in the fourth register, we just have 0. Using a controlled query to QRAM, we can encode AP and FQ in the fourth register, right? For like in the query that I showed in the previous slide. Once we have done that, we apply a Hadamard to the third register. And this gives rise to this state.
Okay,
now,
so when you say 0 of the fourth, it's not just one qubit, right? It's like it's in a bigger Hilbert space because you are encoding a row there.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
the fourth part. It's not a fourth qubit. It's the fourth part.
Right. Fourth
third
part,
is a
fourth
qubit.
Quantum register. Yeah.
Fourth register. Third register is just one qubit.
Yes, sir. Even in the third register, in the subsequent algorithms, I'll have bigger things. So I should not call it a qubit. I should call these are 4 registers. First has P, second has Q, third has an equal superposition of 0 and 1, and fourth has 0. Then we do a query to QRAM. We get AP and FQ, and then we apply a Hadamard to the third register. And
so
this is the
here you can apply Hadamard because it's just a qubit.
Okay. Yeah. Right. And yes, so the probability of measuring 0 in this in third register would be 1 plus the inner product of AP FQ by 2, right? So in a way, we have we can rewrite this state as P Q and having the probability in the amplitude. So in a way, what we have done is we have encoded the probability, the inner product in the amplitude of this quantum state, right? And all of this was being done in superposition. So we took a superposition of all the P, Q, and then we applied the QRAM and the Hadamard, and we obtained this state. Now it is almost equal to what we want, but we still need to multiply the norms AP and FQ, and also we can't apply the non-linearity to the amplitude. So we want it to be in the quantum registers actually. So I'll be using two like subroutines which were introduced, not introduced, which are used in this paper: amplitude estimation and median evaluation. The details of this is given at the end of my slides and also in the paper. I'll not talk about that here, but what they allow us to do is if we have a state which has a certain value P in the amplitude, we can encode it we can encode it inside the quantum register with epsilon precision, right? And the number of queries that it will take is dependent on the probability parameter delta and the precision parameter epsilon. So the reference in the reference and also the paper, they have detailed this, but we can encode the amplitude back into the quantum register. And the fourth register is just a garbage state. We do not care about it right now. Now, once we have this, we just have to multiply with the norms, right? So we query the norms again from the QRAM, and we use a quantum arithmetic circuit. We just multiply it. So, and we finally obtain in this particular register what we needed, like an epsilon approximation to what we needed. The only thing left to do is now applying the nonlinearity, in this case, a ReLU. So we can do that using a classical Boolean circuit, and then we obtain the final state, which is 2me epsilon times like approximate to the actual ground truth that we wanted. Now m is bounded by the maximum, so m equals to the maximum norm product of AP and FQ. So this whole quantity is bounded by 2 times m epsilon. So what we have done is we have created the convolution product that we wanted, this close to what we wanted. Yeah. Now we have it in a quantum state. This state, we want to sample from it so that we can get classical information out of it. And this is like retrieving classical information that we've stored. We will use tomography. But actually, we don't need to retrieve all of these states. So as I talked before, like once we pass it through a layer, not all pixels would have a higher value, right? Only some pixels would have a higher value, or some cells in that for some states will have a higher value. Only some values of P and Q will have a higher value. So we want only those. So for that, can we reduce computation by sampling only the higher, like the meaningful information? For that, I'll again use a quantum preliminary called conditional rotation. We now want to modify the state such that the higher values of F, Y, PQ are measured with high probability. So a natural way to do it would be to get to introduce this back into the amplitude, so that while sampling we'll have a higher probability of measuring those. So we use this like unitary conditional rotation, this procedure, conditional rotation, where given an X and 0, we can pass it through this procedure and get the value of X over max X encoded in the amplitude of the second qubit, right? So we take a X in the first register, 0 in the second register, we pass it through this, and then we'll get X over max X encoded in the amplitude. Now we will not know about the max X. In this case, the max F of Y PQ a priori, but we will do something I'll show in the next slide that will help us get that. So assuming we have conditional rotation, we can put the pixel value back in the amplitude. So we do the same thing. So we apply conditional rotation to the fourth qubit, and we have this alpha PQ 0 plus 1 root over 1 minus alpha square 1. So when alpha PQ is given by this. Now, using the amplitude amplification that we studied in class, we will amplify so we get as close as possible to this state. And using O of 1 over alpha, this is O of 1 over alpha query, we can get this state. Like we can, with high probability, we can get this state, right? So now yes, for the max FQ, we want it to be known from before. So what we'll do is, instead of using a ReLU, which works like this, if it is less than, if the value input value is less than 0, it goes to 0, and if it is greater than 0, then we have a linear output. Instead of doing that, we will cap the ReLU, and so that this this nonlinear function has a maximum value C defined a priori. So we will know the maximum, and then so therefore we can apply the conditional rotation. And
sorry, Snehal, why do we need to upper bound this thing?
Sir, I think it is because we need to like implement the conditional rotation, and here we, I mean, this is just to prove the this is just for proving, I think. And there are some other reasons mentioned in the paper as well. They say that if the value is very high in a QRAM, then it is troublesome, because for example, if they have something like 1000 and they have something like 10, then there is a issue with precision. So they limit it because of this also. But I think it is because of, so that they are able to prove the guarantees, I think. I'm not sure, because at the end, what we have to do is we have to show the classical simulations, right? So we want some precision parameters, and so that we can simulate it classically. Uh, but I will look at it the paper again and add a note in the slide that why are we bounding the max. Okay. So yes, uh, so in this paper they introduced this. This is their contribution, that they have introduced a L infinity tomography. So a tomography with L infinite norm guarantee, where you sample a sigma fraction of the original sample. So for example, this state has all the samples that we have. We will only sample a sigma fraction. Sigma, if sigma is equals to 0.1, then we will only sample 10% of them. And the precision parameter will be given by eta, which is 1 by root over sigma into n. So it has an inverse square dependency on the precision, like the number of samples you need. So yeah, so the details are again given in the end of the slide. The actual theorem and the proof are there in the paper. Yes, so, sorry. Now, once we have like sample, we want to put the values back into the QRAM tree structure so that we can proceed with the next layer. And this is where we do the pooling as well. So now if we want the max of this region, so while storing the values in QRAM, we'll only store the max value in QRAM, right? So this will help us do pooling as well. Now, so this concludes the feed forward part of the algorithm. I'll show the running time that is there in the paper. So the classical running time for this would be this hides polylogarithmic factor, but it is proportional to the input size, and this is the kernel size, right? But in the classical case, we'll have this expression for the running time. So let's go over each of the parameters. So this sigma parameter is the ratio of samples, like the number of the ratio of samples that we did during tomography. This is again the input side. The m and epsilon came during our inner product estimation. So they are the parameters which bounded the precision. And this root over c over expectation of f of x came while conditional rotation. So we'll want the sigma to be as low as possible and epsilon to be as high as possible for a better running time. And yeah, and it's also dependent to see. So we generally keep it close to 10 for like the simulation and the MNIST dataset that we performed here. So yeah, for every task, you will have to tune your sigma and epsilon. And so sigma corresponds to the number of measurements that you'll be making, and epsilon is just the inner product, how accurate your inner product is. And like this, if you see, the kernel size is almost always a constant fraction of the input size, right? So this is somewhat quadratic in input size, whereas this is linear. However, there are some parameters who have to be tuned. So this is not a.
So the running time, quantum running time, does not depend on the kernel size.
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So this is the feed forward part. I'm sorry. Yes, the feed forward part where we took the image, we passed it through kernel, and we applied nonlinearity and pooling, and we have updated the QRAM also. Now we'll do the back propagation. So
let's skip the back propagation. You can finish. You can conclude.
Okay, sir. Okay. So, yeah, I can just show the numerical simulation. Like I'll go over, like this is the original image. After performing a cap value activation function, this is what we get. And after performing the amplitude estimation, we get some noise because there is an epsilon parameter governing the noise. And after doing the quantum sampling parameterized by sigma, we get this. So you can see that the information is still retained after doing all these. These are some of the training curves. Like this, the black one is the classical training curve, and everything else is different. Like training curves for different values of sampling, and you see that the sampling has a very significant effect on the final training accuracy, because it trains really poorly if we take 0.1, which is only 10% of the samples. So yeah, we still need to take a lot of samples for this. And yeah, so there are all the training curves. We can see the relative importance of different parameters. And yeah, this is just the conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Snehal. We will go to Udit. Once Udit finishes, then all of you can ask any other questions to either of them. Okay. So, Snehal, can you stop sharing the screen? Udit, please share your screen. You want to start?
Is it visual, sir?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to present on non-local games and how quantum entanglement provides better strategies for those games. So I'll start with an introduction of what games are. So basically, a game is any interaction between two or more logical units or bodies which interact with some objectives in their mind. And those units which interact are called as the agents or players of the game. And so for the players or agents playing in the game, what we define as strategy is a foolproof plan of action. Like what if something happens, what they will do. If something other happens, what they will do. So this is a foolproof plan of action. Like they know what they have to do in every situation. Then only some some plan they have in mind is called a strategy. Now, what is the utility of a player? So for any player playing a game, the utility is the reward which he gets after the game has concluded in an outcome. So like for the game of chess, the utility for a player would be the winning the game, and some player would lose the game. And like for an auction of an item, in like when when there is an auction, the utility for a player would be to get the item when it gets the item or it doesn't get the item. So these are like the two examples of games. Now we'll know what are local games. So basically, while playing a game, it might happen that the players which are playing the game are present in some locality. They are around each other, or they are not around each other. So on that basis, we define the games as local games or non-local games. Now, in local games, there is a chance that while the game is being played, the players can interact with each other. While in non-local games, we can cut out that opportunity, that possibility. So these are local games and non-local games. Now there are cooperative games and non-cooperative games. Non-cooperative games are those where players don't interact with each other; they play independently. Like what happens? Like take an example of a penalty shoot in football. The goalkeeper and the shooter, they don't interact with each other and they play independently. Like okay, so and
interaction is not the right term. What you want to say is that there are games where both the agents have the same objective, or there are games where where the different players have different objectives. For example, in game of chess, if two players are playing A and B, right, they are not going to cooperate because A wants to win against B, B wants to win against A. That's a non-cooperative. But they're like these non-local games which you are going to describe. In that case, both the players want to achieve the same thing. Correct?
That depends upon how you define the predicate of the game. Like in this case, the predicate is defined for both of them jointly. So if one wins, the other will win. If one loses, the other will lose. In some games, it might not happen that it is defined this way, and then it might be possible that.
So I'm saying that's the definition of non-cooperative and cooperative games.
Yes, I mean, yeah, you may say it this way. I mean, I was trying to cover the broad idea of cooperativeness by interaction. So
because in the cooperative game also you might have interaction, in the non-cooperative game also we might have interaction. Whether you allow interaction or not is different from whether they cooperate or not cooperate, right?
Yeah. So okay. So the main idea is that whatever interactions they are doing, if it has impact on the game, like they might talk on some other things, or that doesn't matter. The point I am trying to say by saying that they are non-cooperative games is that the players come together, they might do anything, but they don't cooperate, they don't agree upon some common strategy or some this share information that is important for the game they are going to play, that
Their
might affect the
objectives
outcome
are
of the game.
different, so they will not cooperate.
Yes. So now then are the complete info.
Udit,
Yes.
Udit,
Yes.
so can every game be classified between non-cooperative and cooperative game?
uh, yes, I think every game can be classified between these two games.
You can have single player games, but yeah, otherwise.
In multiplayer games, like for example, Prisoner's Dilemma, kind of.
Yes, so that game is a non-cooperative game because
Yes.
I mean, when there is no possibility of interaction, that automatically becomes a non-cooperative game, right? Players can't cooperate anyway. The concept of cooperative and non-cooperative games arise means there could be distinction only when the players are allowed to interact. So in Prisoner's Dilemma, the two prisoners are not allowed to interact with each other, right? So so uh, okay.
Yeah, I guess let's move on. This is not a very important point here. Let's move on to the definition of non-local games.
So a complete information game is where every agent playing the game has all the information about the game, the rules of the game, and what is the utility function. How will they get the utility? What on what outcomes they get what utility? So in complete information game, players have all the information, all this information. So if I take an example, the game of chess. So the game of chess is a complete information game. At every stage of the game, every player knows what turns the other player took, what moves they made at which stage, and what the current state of the game is. So they can base their action on this thing. So in the game of chess, they have a complete information about what the current state of the game is. They know everything. They know the rules. They know what will be the outcome when, and they know everything. And contrast it with the game of auction, where the players which are playing the game, uh, the bidders, they don't have the complete information in terms of that they don't know what bid the other person will bid for that item, or what value the particular item has for that person. That's some private information that the players don't know, and that is important for the game. So those games would be incomplete information games. And so the game that we are going to study are incomplete information games, and they are non-local games. Means that the players playing here, like Alice and Bob, they would be separated, and they will not be allowed to do any communication while playing the game, but they might uh, cooperate before the game and come with a joint strategy. So the game is going to be like this. There will be a referee that will ask questions from Alice and Bob. It will ask one question from Alice, one from Bob, and then Alice and Bob will have to reply back. And then depending upon what their reply was to the answer, the referee will decide whether they have won the game or not. So this is the game, and we will see what the optimal strategies are in the classical and quantum case. In classical case, it is easy to see mathematically what the optimal strategies would be. In quantum case, the strategies optimality is basically in some way quantified by Bell's inequality and Salson's equality. Bell's inequality says that if some strategy violates Bell's inequality, it means that it will perform better. It will perform better as a quantum strategy. And Salson's equality gives basically an upper bound on how much better a quantum strategy can perform on any game setting. So we'll study non-local games. So I'm going to define, I mean, what would be the mathematical things to define for the non-local games. So we'll define two sets, S and T. S, they would be non-empty finite sets, and S would be the set of questions that would be asked to Alice. T would be the set of questions asked to Bob. pi is a probability distribution over S, T, which the referee chooses to ask the questions from Alice and Bob, like with which probability some particular questions S and T would be asked from Alice and Bob, and like this way. So pi is a probability distribution over S cross T, and A and B are non-empty and finite sets from which Alice and Bob had to answer the questions asked S and T. And V is the predicate function. Predicate function is the one that defines the utility. So this is a function from STAB to 0 and 1. 0 means loss and 1 means win. So on some particular STAB, it would, if it gives 1, it means that Alice and Bob have won the game. If it is 0, then they've lost the game. So the game, a particular game is defined by what the predicate is and what the probability distribution on my set S cross T is. So, okay, so what a classical strategy would be for this case? A classical strategy, a deterministic classical strategy would be something like Alice would say, okay, I'm going to be asked questions from the set S, and for every question that I may ask, let us say if referee asks me S, I will answer this thing. If it asks me something else, I will answer this thing. So this will be a deterministic classical strategy where the strategy is a function from, wait a minute. The strategy sigma 1 for Alice is a function from S to A. So for every question that might be asked to Alice, she will choose some answer from A, and she will have it predetermined. So this will be a function from S to A. And similarly, a deterministic strategy for Bob would be a function that is from T to B. So the joint strategy would be a function from S cross T to A comma B, such that sigma ST is defined as sigma 1S comma sigma 2T, where sigma 1 is the strategy for Alice and sigma 2 is the strategy for Bob. Okay.
Udit?
Yes.
So you mentioned that it's an incomplete information game. So what exactly is the information missing to the players?
Incomplete information is that they might come upon a joint strategy, like I have written here. They might come upon a joint strategy before the game, but once the game starts, Alice and Bob don't know what question is being asked to the other person. Like, there is no communication in between the game. So if Alice is being asked some question S, she doesn't know what the question is being asked to T, but she might have an idea of what the probability distribution over those questions would be, because she knows what pi is. This probability distribution pi is already known. The incomplete information arises from the fact that they don't know what particular question is being asked. So is it clear?
So Udit, like, why does Alice care like what question is being asked to Bob? Because they've already met before and decided upon what answers to give, right?
Yes, so they have decided. Okay. See, because there is a predicate function, and predicate function depends upon the answers of Alice and Bob both. Let us say there is for some question asked S to Alice, there is only one answer, T1, let's say, that Bob should answer so that they win. Like for all possible SS belong to S, there is only one T belong to T. There is only one T1 for which their predicate is going to be 1. So if Alice is asked question S, if she knows the probability distribution, it would matter to her, because she would then know that, okay, whatever probability distribution I'm getting, okay, whatever question I will get, only with this much probability I can answer it correctly, because only with this much probability Bob will be asked this question, right? So in this way.
Okay, Udit, I think it will be helpful if you just take an example, and just to for everyone to emphasize, this is a game where both Alice, either after their study, either both win or both lose. Remember this. So both of them are in together in this game. Okay, they want to cooperate, as Udit has already written. And what is the problem? Why can't they always win? I think if Udit, you take the example of a game, it will be clear.
Okay, so
or take a CHS game or something, some simple game.
Okay,
you want to say what is
so
this?
Sir, is the game of dice an incomplete information game? Sir, not sir dice, like the game of cards and incomplete information game.
Like what game of?
I think, sir, it has become clear after you have explained.
See, I don't think of it in terms of game theory notation. Okay, these are not the game theory kind of games.
So okay, for an example, let us say this is my game, CHSS game. So here the sets ST and AB are 0 and 1, and pi is the uniform distribution over S cross T. Means the questions asked could be 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0 with probability 1 by 4 all. And the predicate is defined as V over ST AB is 1 if A XOR B is S conjunction T or 0 otherwise. So what question someone asked is that why would it matter for Alice to know what question was asked to Bob, right? Okay, so the answer is that, see, since the predicate is a function of ST and AB both, so for some it is a function of these 4 variables. Like for some question asked to Alice, she doesn't know what question is asked to Bob, but the ultimate predicate that is going to be computed on the collective answers that they will give A and B, that depends upon all those things, ST and A and B. It might happen that like Alice would be ignorant to this and would answer something and it is going to be 0. Like, okay, for example, let us say the questions are there, S is given to be 1, T is given to 1, so X conjunction T is 1, and Alice answers A as 1, let's say. So you know that for the predicate to be 1, if XOR would be 1, it means that A and B should have to would be different. So if Alice answers 1, then Bob has to answer 0 to win. Like he can't be ignorant that okay, I don't care, I would answer randomly with some probability, I would answer 1, with some probability I would answer 0. It can't be like that. So a cooperation is needed here. So that was the idea, that they will have to cooperate. They must cooperate to have an optimal strategy. Otherwise, they won't be able to get an optimal strategy.
So basically, if they're using a classical strategy, whether they use pure strategies or mixed strategies, they can't arrive at an optimal strategy, right?
No, I'm not saying this. Here the thing was that someone asked that why would Alice care if what question was asked to Bob. So this was just to say that since the predicate is a function of all the 4 variables, it would matter. Now coming to your part, yeah, there some classical strategy. I'm not saying that no optimal strategy would exist for the classical case. Classical case would have their own optimal strategies, but the optimal strategies that are obtained for the quantum case have better utilities, more utilities than what are for the classical case. That is the main idea of this presentation.
Udit?
Yes.
Udit, what I was asking is that why would Alice care why Bob, what question Bob would be asked if they have already decided what to answer when a particular question is asked? But now I think I've understood, because basically they don't know the predicate function. They cannot decide upon what to answer. Right?
No, they know the predicate.
No. Okay,
Everyone knows the
let
predicate.
me tell this thing, that the only thing hidden in this game is what question was asked to Bob and what question was asked to Alice. Rest everything is known. They know the sets ST and A and B. They know the probability distribution pi. They know the predicate. So that's why they are coming with the joint strategy. That way only they are able to come with a joint strategy. Now, can you repeat your question again?
So if they know all this, so they are allowed to meet before the game, right? So they can decide upon what to answer when a particular question is asked. So and they also know the predicate. So in that sense, they'll always win, right?
Yes. Yeah. No. Why would they always win, right? I mean, they would always win only when STAB, the predicate function, is always going to win on all the inputs.
They know the predicate function from before, right?
Yes.
So they decide.
See, S cross T, all the possible questions could be asked, right? There might be some S cross T for which all the answers they give, for example, let's take, for all the answers they give A and B, the predicate is going to be 0. So, and in those cases, they are not going to be anyway, right?
Okay, yeah.
You will see an example, the CHSH game, you will see that they know the predicate. You still can't win with probability.
Yes. Okay, so for this deterministic classical strategy, the expected utility would be this summation over all the possible inputs, all the possible questions that might be asked, S comma T, and then this is the probability. The probability with which the question would be asked, and then they are using this joint strategy sigma st. So the answers would be sigma st, and this is the predicate function. So this will be the expected probability with which they will win the game in a with a deterministic classical strategy sigma. Now, classical value. So classical value is defined basically as the maximum probability of winning that they can obtain with a classical strategy. Now, so before talking about classical value, let's talk about what would be a probabilistic strategy. Before we had talked about what was the deterministic strategy. So that in that case we had functions, defined functions, which with I mean let us the functions were like sigma 1 from S to A. So for any input S, any question S that is asked to Alice, she gave only one answer that was given by sigma 1 of that particular S, sigma 1 of S. Now in this case, a probabilistic strategy would be some probability distribution over all the classical strategies. Like if this phi is the set of all classical deterministic strategies that Alice and Bob, joint strategies that Alice and Bob might have. So a probability distribution over this set psi would give me a probabilistic strategy. So is this point clear to everyone? Like how a probability distribution over this set would give me a probabilistic strategy? Like for an example, you can take like okay, a match is going to happen and one player is asked to call for head or tail. A deterministic strategy would be someone like who always calls head or always calls tails. So these two strategies would be deterministic strategies. Like whatever the coin, I don't care, the coin will be tossed and I will call heads. So this will be one deterministic strategy. The other would be something like I will always call tails. And a probabilistic strategy would be something like, okay, I will call with, let's say 1/4 probability I will call heads, and 3/4 probability I will call tails. So this will be a probabilistic strategy. So that is given by a probability distribution over my set phi. Now, so in this probability distribution case, the utility with my strategy would be this thing: the summation over all the possible classical strategies that I may have, the deterministic strategy, their probability, the probability with which I would be using them, and then the expected utility of winning using that particular strategy. So this will be my utility in that case. And then classical value would be the maximum utility that I can obtain over all the probabilistic strategies. Like see that deterministic strategy is also probabilistic strategy. So probabilistic strategy cover all the classical strategies that could be there. So so classical value would be the maximum value that I can obtain. And since a probability distribution is basically a convex summation of all those utilities that one might have over classical deterministic strategies, so the maximum value will be obtained as a deterministic strategy. Like this is something like saying that a mean can't be greater than the maximum value. Since here what we are taking is we are taking a mean, we are taking expectation with respect to some probability distribution delta. So this this value can't be more than any of the values that will be occurring here. So the maximum value that can be obtained will only be obtained at some deterministic strategy only. So for while talking about the classical value, we won't worry about the probabilistic strategies. We would worry only about the deterministic strategies. That was the point of this thing. Now, so this omega c is defined as the classical value of the game G V pi, that is maximum over all the classical strategies sigma belong to this set phi, this expected utility of winning. Now then we'll see what quantum strategies are. So quantum strategies are like this. Okay, so the quantum strategies are defined in this way that Alice and Bob, they both have a bipartite state and they share some part of it. Alice has one part of it, Bob has one part of it. The state belongs to some tensor space A cross B, and AB, which both of them are isomorphic to Cn for some positive integer Cn. That's just to denote that they belong to some n-dimensional vector space.
See, that basically means that Alice and Bob will share some quantum state. It could possibly be entangled.
Yeah.
Right? That's what. Sorry, question.
And so depending, they will have this state, and to answer the question that they will be asked, they will make, Alice and Bob will make measurements on this state. Now this state will be a bipartite state, and it could be entangled. So they will have their probabilities shaped like this. So the measurements that they are going to make are going to like this, that they will have a set of measurement operators. Alice would have some set of measurement operators, XAS, for S belonging to S and A belonging to A. So Alice would have these, I mean, for whatever question she is being asked, let us say she is being asked some S for the case that we had S equals to 0, 1, the set 0, 1. So let us say she is asked 0. So she will have some projective measurement operators. She will have a measurement corresponding to that S. So she will measure her part of the qubit, her part of the state with respect to that measurement. And then whatever the output she gets, she will reply according to that. And similarly, it is going to happen for Bob. So here XAS and BIBT are projector matrices such that.
Yeah, what do you mean by reply here? What do you mean by reply here?
See, it was in the it was the way the game was going to happen. Like a referee was going to ask questions S and T to Alice and Bob, and they had to reply A and B. Right? I mean.
Okay. I understand.
Remember that in the quantum strategy, the communication between referee and players will not be quantum. We assume in this case that the referee is a classical thing. So whatever quantum thing can happen, they can happen between Alice and Bob.
So are we using entanglement as a form of communication between A and B? So that will be like cooperative.
Yes. That is the cooperative strategy. Like they have before the game, they have come with some entangled state, and that would within the game help them in some way. Like they will not be communicating.
Essentially, you have changed the rules of the game, then, right?
So no. They are not communicating. They are not transferring any data. They are not transferring any information during the game.
What about this? Let's say before Alice and Bob play the game, before they go far away and they get the question, Charlie comes and Charlie gives them a box. Okay. That box will have either one red ball, one blue ball, both red balls, two blue balls or something, shared randomness or something.
Okay.
And then they can decide. Will you call that cheating?
No, but see, what I'm saying is that according to what Alice will answer,
so Alice can answer based on that shared randomness.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's not like what I was thinking. Yeah.
Right. So the point is that communication means that once you get the questions, can you say something to Bob based on that questions? You can't. Entanglement has been decided before, right? And in the classical case, you can have random sequences that will not help. That's what this will show.
But the communication over here is just that Alice can make some measurement on her qubit, on her part of the entangled qubit, and then that will have an effect on Bob, right? So, but then that box randomness, you can't have that, right? In that same thing.
No, but we kind of know, right, that this entanglement thing, right? That this okay. I think probably the way this thing was put, it seems like okay. What is the use of these games? Why are we defining these games?
I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Udit, do you want to answer? Why are we studying these games? What was the objective?
The objective was to show that there exist quantum strategies which use quantum entanglement and get better better performance, like better utility and better.
So what will that show? What will that show? Okay, so let me give you an example. Suppose someone comes to you and says they have entangled bits. You are a classical person. How will you test that they have quantum entanglement? One way would be that you will play this game with them. And if they have entangled qubits, they should be able to win this game with much higher probability as compared to if those entangled bits were fake. You see that?
Yes.
Right. Other way to say it is that if someone shows, actually these were actually first time shown to show the existence that quantum mechanics is actually true. Because if quantum mechanics was not true, if classical mechanics was true, or if there was no quantum mechanics, then there should be no way to win this kind of a game with probability higher than some number, whichever is the classical value. But then experimentally, they were able to get correlations or win this game with higher probability than the classical thing. That means there is something extra.
That's the idea of Bell's inequality, right?
Exactly. These games are computer science language formulation of Bell's violation of Bell. This shows that entanglement is real. This gives you an experiment such that you can test whether entanglement exists in the world or not. What will be the experiment? You will play this game, and if you can win this game with high probability, that means those people should have had entanglement.
Yes.
Right. That is why questions of, oh, is this cheating, or are we giving more power to quantum? Those are irrelevant. The point is to test whether entanglement exists in this way.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay, so a quantum strategy then would be the state that they are having, the shared state psi, and the measurement operators that they are having. So these two things would define what is going to be their quantum strategy. Now then the question that the question S, T that would be asked to Alice and Bob, it would be given the reply A, B with the probability, the probability of applying these measurement operators upon the state psi. So this will determine the probability with which the state S, T would be given the reply A, B. Now, so in this case, the quantum utility then would be the probability distribution pi S, T, then the expected utility using this using the strategy that they are having. So for any question S, T, they would be asked with some probability pi S, T, they would answer A, B with the probability given by this measurement thing, and B, S, T, would give the predicate whether they have one or not. So this is going to be their quantum utility. Now the quantum value, the maximum utility that they can obtain is basically, in this case, there could be a supremum over all the strategies. Supremum, just because we have not given, we have not fixed something. I mean, we have not restricted this n here. So they might have states that are any dimension. Like this is going to be a Hilbert space, right? So it can be an infinite dimensional Hilbert space. They might choose their state from that Hilbert space. So it is not necessary that the maximum would exist in this set. Like it might be a limit also. So that why they are defining it as a supremum over all the strategies. Now, then one more way, there is one more way to define quantum strategies, that is using these observables. Like a Hermitian matrix that is associated with the projective measurement would be an observable, and it will have real numbers and outcomes. So for a projective measurement P1 to Pk, this is a projective measurement, the probability is going to be 1, the summation over all IPI is going to be I. So a matrix, a Hermitian matrix A as summation from I equals to 1 to k lambda IPI, this would be an observable. So whenever a state is measured with this, with respect to this observable, so it will come to like the state size, let's say size measured. So it will come to the state pi psi with probability mod pi psi norm pi psi whole square, and the outcome would be lambda. So we can also state our quantum strategy using this observable thing. Now, okay, so now we will discuss our CHSH game. So this game is like
I just did not get one thing. So once we measure, like once Alice measures, then won't it disturb the entanglement for the subsequent questions?
Oh, you have just one question.
In this game, there is just one question, like one S, T is being asked. These are like, this is expected probability over all different instances of the game.
Okay.
You want to play K copies, you will have K copies of entanglement.
Okay.
So in this game, the sets STAB are going to be 0, 1, and pi is uniform distribution over ST, and the predicate B is defined as V STAB is 1 if A XOR B is S and T, and 0 otherwise. So in this case, like we had already defined what would be the utility of the game for deterministic classical strategy.
Yeah. To understand this predicate, what it is saying is that if S and T are both 1,
then my A and B would be different, and if any of S and T is not 1, then my A and B should be same.
And now think about it. You can't make it happen all the time.
Yes, I mean, I've written this down that the classical value of the game would be 3 by 4. See that since pi is a uniform distribution over S cross T and S cross T has 4 elements, so the utility that one can have are only n by 4, like 1 by 4, 0, 1 by 4, 2 by 4, 3 by 4, and 1. These are the only possible values of utility using a deterministic strategy, and this utility can't be 1. If this utility is 1, it implies that for 1, like when S and T has and are 1, then S and T would be 1, then A of 1 and B of 1 won't be same, they would be different, right? But they are same for all other things because they have to give the XOR value to 0, so they must be same for all other I comma j which are not 1 comma 1. But that means to say that A of 0 is B of 0, A of 0 is equal to B of 1, and B of 0 is equal to A of 1, and that actually includes all those things, like all the values are same, A of 0, A of 1, A of B of 0, B of 1, all 4 values are same, so which implies that A of 1 is B of 1. That can't happen, that's a contradiction, right? So they can't achieve utility 1, and the next possible utility that they can achieve is 3 by 4, so that's the maximum utility that they can achieve, or it can be achieved. So that's the classical value of the game. Now the quantum strategy here is that they share a entangled state psi, that's the Bell state, and we have some, like these are the states that are used to define the operators that Alice and Bob have. So Alice will have these operators like x0a, that is an outer product of psi a0 and where psi a would be what reply C is going to be. A would be 0 or 1 depending upon what C is going to give. This will be the matrix psi of A of 0 for A0. This definition of psi is phi 0 theta would be used, and for A going to be 1, this definition would be used. So these are the operators that Alice would have, and these are the operators that Bob would have. Like, so these are the angles chosen so that finally the utility comes with some particular probability. So for questions S comma T, answer A comma B would be given with this probability. We know this. Now the important thing to notice here is that since we have used this state Bell state, this product basically comes out to be half of trace of X star Y. Now this is something you can see like X tensor Y.
You should conclude with it. Don't worry, you won't be able to explain the quantum strategy. Just say that there is a quantum strategy when you can do that.
Okay. So basically, it means that there will exist some quantum strategy that will give correct answers with probability cos square pi by 8, that is 0.85, and that is more than this probability. So that in case also shows that there exists a quantum strategy that performs better than the classical strategy. Now next we have this magic square game.
Udit, you don't have time.
Okay.
The time is already up. You're 35 minutes now.
Okay, so yes, so this was just the presentation to show that quantum strategies perform better than classical strategies using entanglement, and also to show that such strategies exist. I mean, Bell's inequality violated and Charles inequality also achieved. Yes, okay.
Right. Just before we finish the session, I just want to say that this non-local games are actually pretty interesting in terms of classes. The question of finding the value of a non-local game is very, very hard. Right? There are these if you have gone into classical complexity, there are classes like IP and IP star and things like that. Similarly, in quantum, you have these classes MIP, MIP star, and so on and so forth. And figuring out these classes is the power of these classes has been a big open question. Recently in 2020, there was a paper which showed that actually this finding the value of a non-local game is actually a very difficult task. It actually has what do you call undecidable problems also, and that proof actually shows a very big open conjecture of math to be false. It is surprising how connections of connections with quantum give you some result which is completely classical. even before quantum computing started, there was a mathematical conjecture which is 60-65 years old, but it was solved because people understood the structure of these things. I guess anything more relations about this is outside the scope of the course, but these things are studied in computer science and they have wonderful properties. It's a very, very active area. Anyway, thank you, Snehal. Thank you, Udit, taking so much time and trying to understand this thing and present it to all. I think all of us should thank both of them. Thank you. If there are any other questions, please free to ask.
Sir, can we talk for 5 minutes after the class? Are you free?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great presentation. So I had a question for Snehal. Is he here?
Yes.
Yeah. So can you briefly explain what parts are happening in quantum settings and when is the measurement taking place and what parts in the classical setting?
Yeah, so like the feed forward and the back for both will be done in the quantum setting, right? I'll be using, like, the paper uses this structure, quantum random access memory, QRAM structure, and after retrieving the information from the state, we have to update the QRAM. So that thing, you can assume, like, you can call it to be a classical thing, but otherwise the algorithm proceeds completely on a quantum, right? The data access is the only part where we have to do it classically, encoding the data. And
when we get the label, we get it by measurements.
Yes.
Okay.
We did an amplification, right, in the end to achieve the state.
What? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
So in the end, we did amplitude amplification to achieve the desired state, right?
Yes.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then thank you.